Hello and welcome to the Alpha Anywhere demo and Q&A. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software. I'm pleased to present Sarah Mitchell, our Director of Customer Success. Today, Sarah is going to be continuing our discussion on APIs, and I think this will be part of a two-part webinar. I think she's going to go into data authentication or API authentication, which is something we get an awful lot of questions on. Of course, this is also a Q&A session, so you could type those questions into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll be happy to get to them during this session. So let's get started. Hello, Sarah, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, and I can see your screen, so we're ready to get going.
All right. So yes, today we are continuing the discussion about APIs, building your own APIs. Last week, Dion showed how to create an API, a pretty basic one. And today I wanted to talk about authentication, API authentication, limiting who can access your API, what they can access in your API, in controlling how they access your API. So when we talk about authentication, it's often paired with two terms, authorization and authentication. So authorization is what you can do, while authentication is proving who you are. So authentication is the act of proving an assertion, the assertion being that you have you're a specific individual who has access to an API, and if you can prove who you are to me, then I will let you make requests and give you back data, information, whatever it is that you want to get. So an example of authentication would be two-factor authentication. So you've provided your username and your password to log in, and that third piece of information, the authentication piece, is a code from something like a text message being sent to your phone, or opening up the Google Authenticator app and pulling one of those codes out and entering it in. That is proving to the system who you are before we let you in. So with APIs, there's a lot of ways why we should talk about why you want to do that. So I'll back it up a bit. Why would you want to authenticate your API? So the first one might be pretty obvious, is just limit who can access it. So if you put an API out there that's public and you don't restrict who's making calls to it, you're opening yourself up to any volume of calls. Denial of service attacks, I think everyone is very familiar with on websites and can take your website down. So if you don't do an authentication piece and you just put your API out there for everyone to use, you are exposing yourself to this risk. But you're also sort of like just putting everything out there. Now, if your API is one that you want everyone to access, that's fine. You can make it public, make it easy to get to. An example of a public API that I've used for making demos and stuff is the useless facts API, where they don't care who you are. You just ask them for a useless fact and they send you one. So you can have these APIs, but most people are probably building something either against your database or some service you've created, and you want to have some control over that. So when you authenticate, you can limit who accesses your API. You can limit what they can access. That's the authorization piece. It defines what they can do once they've authenticated who they are. You can do things like rate limiting. You can audit. You can see what calls people are making. So, there's a lot of reasons you would want to make sure to have some sort of upfront piece to ask people to prove who they are before they start accessing the information you're providing. So with respect to authentication methods, there are four terms you'll see out there that are pretty common. And I wanted to just touch on each one of these because the type of authentication you choose is gonna define how sure you want to be that the person who is making that request is authorized to do so. So basic authentication and also bearer authentication they're basic. They're also the most vulnerable. So with basic authentication, what that is you basically you encode your username and password into a request header and send that in, and the server gets it and says, yes, your username and password are correct. Here's your data. that's that's very easy to implement, but it's also not very secure. So if someone gets a hold of a username and password, like they can spoof it because it's sent over via like an HTTP request. It's easy to do like a man in the middle kind of thing where you could sneak in there and sniff that information out and pretend to be that person later to make those requests. So by and large, that method is not used very often. Another one called bearer authentication involves a security token. It's called a bearer token. And if somebody has that token, then the system says, okay, yeah, you can access this. But it's sort of like that same thing. It's still like a username and password. And sometimes it's restricted to a URL, but by and large, it's sort of, if they have that key, then it's all good. So this third one, it might not seem that it's any better, an API key, but whereas an authorization, the first two authorizations may be passed in unencrypted and easy to get a hold of, API keys are a little more in depth. They can be used to restrict what you're accessing, so you can scope them. They're sent in with the request, as with the other two, and often with API keys, they're linked to an account, so like a user or an email address, so that you have the ability to turn them off or reset them if needed. So the fourth one, which we're not going to do today, but I would like to do a demo of this next month, is OAuth. And OAuth 2 specifically is proving to be the model that everybody wants to go to. So we'll talk about how you set up using like an API key, how you would generate that in the system today. But with OAuth 2, which is something I want to get to, the system for proving who you are using that authentication method is a little more involved. And what it basically is the client goes to your authentication server to get a piece of information that only they can get, and then they send that token that they get back to your server, and then your server goes to the same authentication server and says, hey, I got this token from this person. Here's a piece of information identifying me as myself. Is this correct? And if it comes back with yes, that's the individual who claims that they are, then you're authorized to move from there. So we'll do an API key demo. I don't think we'll get to actually doing the demo today on generating and authenticating with the API key, but definitely the next one. And then OAuth will be the third one that comes down the line. With API key authentication, there's a few things you need to set up. And in this case, talking about a workflow, the way the API key would go out is somebody requests an API key from your system. So maybe they have to sign up, register, and log in, create an account with you, and then generate an API key. You see this with the Google Developers Console, where you go in and you enable certain APIs, you get your API key. For example, Google Maps, if you're using a Google Maps API, you would go up to Google Developers Console, enable the Google JavaScript Map API, get your API key, put that in Alpha Anywhere, and now that's what you use to make all those queries to their map interface. So with API key authentication, the user's gonna request something from your system. You need to provide that key back to them, which they then use on all the requests. And then using that API key, they kind of prove that they are allowed to access your endpoints. So with access comes some new information. I'm sure everyone here knows about HTTP status codes. And then there's 5 types. There's informational, your 100 class, which are just protocol information being communicated. 200 is success. There's a bunch of different types of success you can have. 300 is redirection, so the page has moved, and in those cases, the client making the call has to do something if they want the request to complete, such as take the new URL that you sent back to them and go and make their query against that other endpoint where it's now at. And then the last two, with 400 series, which are client errors, where the client did something wrong, either they called the wrong endpoint or they didn't give you the right data. And then 500 server error is you did something wrong and it's your problem and you need to fix it. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because with API, if you're going to do authentication, you need to know about status codes and which types of codes to return in cases where the user is authorized or the user is not authorized, as well as if the user has just not provided the correct information to your endpoint. So I decided to highlight just a few key status codes here that are key to know, with one useless one that I thought was fun. So a 200 success means the API call is successful and we sent the data back and everything's good. Now there are other types of 200 successes, and if you want to get into it, you can go online and look into the spec and decide if you want to use some of these other ones. Some of them are like, it succeeded, but there was no data, those kinds of things. But 200 success by and large is what you're going to call if everything works out, everything checks out. Now, in the 400 class, there's a few that are good to know. So 400 bad request is the request is incorrect. I called your API endpoint and I provided none of the parameters that you require to query that endpoint. So the API is going to see that and say, I can't do anything with this and give back a 400 bad request. So if you didn't get the right information to do the request in the first place, a 400 bad request will go back. Now, if you do get the request and it's in the correct form, but they didn't give you authentication information, that would be a 401 unauthorized. So with a 401 unauthorized, which is different from a 403 forbidden, the user can make another request provided that they provide the correct authentication information if they get a 401 back. Compared to a 403 forbidden means you're not authorized. So either the credentials are wrong or they didn't provide them. It's up to you if you want to provide that level of detail of 401 unauthorized, you've made a call and you didn't provide the authentication required for this endpoint. But what often many people will do is just do the 403 forbidden. So it doesn't matter if you provided the credentials or if the credentials were wrong. We're just going to tell you you don't have access to this endpoint. So those three are good to know to use when you're building out your XBasic tests against the authentication. And then this last one is actually an April Fool's joke that made it into the spec, but it's 418 on a teapot. And it should only ever be used if someone is trying to brew coffee using a teapot.
All right, wait, it seems like there was one more little joke you planted in there. 404 is missing. It's not
404
found.
not found.
Exactly. Very clever. I see what you
I
did
accidentally did that.
Well done.
Yeah, my bad. Yeah, 404 not found. But so you're not going to return a 404 not found though, because the 404 not found is going to come from
The
the
server
browser.
would give you that
Yeah,
back.
the
That would
server
be
gives that
much
back
lower
because
level.
it literally can't find the endpoint, so there would be nothing for you to return in that case.
Yep.
Yeah. So today I wanted to sort of start building out the framework for our API that's going to handle the authentication. And the reason why I want to just show you guys how we're going to build it out is because there are a lot of pieces that go into this. It's not as simple as just sort of like you generated a token, you send it back. You need to have a place for people to request the key. You need to have a way to generate that key. You need a way to store it and the associated info with that key. What can they access, who they are, etc. And as well as a way to validate that key. So that's what I want to get into today. There we go. And what I'd like to show is creating a web service for a database. So this is Alpha Anywhere, and I believe this is the full edition. So I do have this control panel button up there. If you're in Community Edition, you won't see that because that's a desktop feature and we can't build desktop apps in Community Edition. But I'd like to start by creating a new REST service, and I would like to consume tables from a database or provide access to them. So we're going to use our lovely Northwind demo. If you don't have this, there's often a link down here you could click to generate the AA demo Northwind connection string. It also appears here. This one is it's just the SQLite version. You can also make the Access version, but we'll use this. So that's going to define the database we want to expose, and then I'll go in here and select what we want to expose from that database, and we want customers, orders, and order details. And now next, we're going to decide what people can do with this data. And for the sake of simplicity, we're just going to have select here. So we'll do select orders, and order details. That's all the actions that can be performed here. And then finally, we have to give this service a name. So we'll just call this customer demo and click OK. So at this point, Auth Anywhere has generated a REST service called customer demo, which is this file you see up here. There are a bunch of other files associated with this. We'll take a look at that. Click OK. Would we like to live test the API? Why not? Let's pull this open here so you can drag that off. So as part of that generation, we create a Swagger page. Swagger is a language for defining a REST service. And from it, there's a tool that can generate HTML pages. So you can just, click through it and try things out. So, excuse me. So these are the three endpoints we've created: customer select, order detail select. And if I come down to one of these and try it out and just click execute, we'll see that it's pulled down all the data here of our customers. If we wanted to change this, maybe we just want the customer ID field. And let's say we only want where a country is Germany. I think that's how you specify it. And execute this again. You'll see that we just got this small subset of customers. If we wanted to see the country just for validation, we'll add country there, execute. And there we see we've got Alfkey, Germany, Bloss, Germany, so on and so forth. So really fast to get this started. So this first piece of just creating the API for our database was very, very simple and straightforward to set up. The harder part is getting the authentication piece in place. But before we can even write the XBasic to test authentication, we need to build that out first. So I created a table earlier this week called web service. And if we go and we look at it in the database explorer, let's add it in here. Nope. Add to database explorer. There we go. Web service. It's got a table in it called keys, and it's got a few things in it. It's got an email, an API key, a scope field, which we may or may not use, expired, so I can disable it if we wanted to, and then two date fields. One's a date for when it was added, and then the other one is last modified, so that would be whenever this record got modified. And what we like to do is create an interface for somebody to come in, enter their email address, and get an API key. So let's do that by creating a new UX component. So I'll go to new web component, UX, click OK. And then add in the fields that I want to include here. So I want to capture their email address. So we'll add a text box called email. Click OK. And then we would like to show the API key when it's generated. So we'll use the static text control for that. Sorry, not a static text control, a label. And we'll also need a button. And we'll say get API key. And let's use primary here. Okay. So if we live preview this, we'll just have a few things. We'll have a text box, a button, and a field where we would like to show our API key. So for this, we're going to want to do this on the server to generate the API key. And there's a number of ways you can do this. You can use Action JavaScript to add an ajax callback here, which if you prefer to name your ajax callbacks so they're easier to find, you can define them over here in the next basic function section. Makes it easier to maintain your stuff if you need to find it later. But there's also a server-side xBasic mode that is basically the same thing. The major difference being that the function name for you is generated automatically. So we could use this to add in the logic for making our API key. And for the API key, I want to keep it pretty simple, but we need to do two things. We need to read the email. Well, a few things. We need to read the email address out of the field. So we need to send that back. We need to generate the API key and put it into our database. And then we need to send the API key back to display it on the screen for the customer. So to do this, we're going to use the data submitted variable to read the email address. So go dim email, C equals email. And this will contain, and we'll put a debug here too so we can walk through after this. So this is going to be our email address. So before we generate the API key, we want to find out if there's already a field in our database. So we'll do that by first checking to see if the user exists. So we can use the SQL lookup function. This is one of many SQL helper functions that we have in the system for querying a database, which is a little bit easier to work with than writing out the SQL connections, SQL arguments workflow of querying a database. So we're going to go, we're going to query our, here, we'll show this. We'll right click on this black text here and, ooh, maybe not. We'll control down. Oh, it looks like I can't do that. Sometimes there's a helper here that will let you. So we're going to name, let's think of service. And we're going to look at keys. And we want to check that email is equal to email, which is a argument, the colon email syntax. And then finally, we want to get the key out of that. And we're going to give it args. And args is a SQL arguments object. And using the SQL arguments, this Alpha Anywhere handles doing things like sanitizing the data to prevent you from being exposed to stuff like SQL injection attacks. So you always want to use arguments when building queries, especially if you are reading data that's been sent to you from the client, because you have no idea what you're going to get. So args.set, we're going to call it email. I'm going to set it to email. And then we'll hear dim result. C, and then result equals that. So, okay. And then finally, if the result I think we want to compare it if it's not blank. So if it's not blank, then we will say key equals result. Otherwise, key equals, I think it's UUID create. I'm gonna have to look this up real quick. I'm doing a lot of this from memory today, so. Looks like it's just GUID create. There we go. There we go. We'll create a new GUID. And if we do that, then we would like to do a SQL insert. Keys, oops, where email equals email, CLR, okay, let's build this out a little bit differently. Values, all right. And I'm not gonna do that method because I need to give it arguments. So if we need to insert this, then we're gonna add it. So let me see, SQL insert. Looks like we can do it as as JSON on that. So let's do this. We'll go dim new record as P, new record dot email equals email, key equals key. Oops, well, I don't know why I don't want to create a function there. And then dim fields. So the JSON generate. There we go. New record. Name web service. We're gonna not execute this the first time around because I want to verify that we've got it right the first time. So, and then finally, we need to return some JavaScript. So we'll do dim.js c dialog object set value in our API key field, the value key. And then finally, this says to replace the JavaScript to return from the function, but you can just do return JS here. So to walk you through what this is doing, and it's obviously not going to catch everything. We're not testing to make sure that the email isn't blank. So that's going to be an edge case. We're also not doing much effort here to validate that it's a real email. So you may want to consider doing that as well. But what it's going to do is that we're going to read the email that was submitted out of the submitted email variable. We're going to set up a SQL arguments object that has that value. We're going to look up in our keys table if that email already exists, it will return the key. Oh no, I had that right. The key that we have on record. If it doesn't have anything on record, then result should be empty. We shouldn't get anything back. In which case, If it's not empty, then their key is the result that was given to us. Otherwise, we need to generate a new one. This GUID create generates a GUID. We're just going to use that for this. And so with this else case, we generate the key, we insert it into our table. I should probably do this dim result. Or just result here. Insert it into our table, and if all goes well, then that will be recorded, and then we just send back to the server, hey, set the value in this API key control to the value of key. And all JS escape does is it goes through that text and escapes anything that could be a problem when trying to put it inside of a string in a JavaScript statement. So let's save that and live preview and see how well we did.
All right.
And keep in mind that we set SQL insert to false, so it's not going to execute the insert code. So we should, we get an error, look at that. So let's go check it out. We must have done something wrong here. Do I have an XBasic error in my code? I wonder if it still wants me to do this. Let's try working preview.
Also no end function? Or is this?
No end function? No, the end function is further down the.
Oh, gotcha. Thanks.
Yeah. No, it doesn't want to call that. Maybe I did forget. No, end function is right here.
Is it the way bottom? Yeah.
Yeah. Indeed. I'm gonna scrap this then. And we'll just go back to doing an ajax callback. So I'll add a new action. Ajax callback. Generate API key. Click on that. Oops. Create the function prototype. I'll just paste this here. And we need to return JS at the end of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then it will select all of it. We'll copy it. Function declarations, paste it. There we go. I don't need anything else here. Okay. API key. Save it. It should be over here now, so we can see it here. And do a live preview.
Someone pointed out that while it was going wrong, what was interesting was that the number that it said for the function, like function number XYZ, whatever, didn't actually match what was in the code itself.
I saw
So
that
it's a
too.
good
So
change.
I'm gonna make a mental note to test that out
Let's
later.
check that
So
out.
here we are. Here's the debugger. And let's take a look at eData submitted. So here's what was submitted, sarah@example.com. And we're using example.com because example.com is the universal example website. It's literally reserved for that on the internet. So this is our email. We're gonna go back and add the word as in here because I didn't do that right. I bet that's what the problem. There we go. Dim as, and let's make sure I got them all. New record, fields as, JSON as. All right. Let's do this. Get API key demo. There we go. Let's try that again. So there's our email. We step here. We set args. I don't know why I picked .set down there, but if we look at the args variable, it's got one argument in it now. And if you look in the XML, you can see its name is email and its value is that email address. Gonna step into our lookup and take a look at result. Result is empty. So this should skip into our next section here. And this is the thing we want to look at here. Look at new record, we'll look at results. So as we step through here, we'll see that here's our GUID that was created. Now, you may not want to include curly braces and dashes, so that there is a function we can quickly add to strip that stuff out. But here we'll create our new record. We'll add the email, we'll add the key. So if we expand new record down here, which I hope you can see, let's scroll down a bit. Here's our email, here's our API key. Fields is going to be the JSON representation of that. So if we expand that, we say open curly brace, and then here's that first line of text in the second one. And then when we run this, can assign a data type of P to C. We will return with error. We'll go fix that right now. We'll just call that result 2, because I had already defined result up here as a C. That's why that happened. So go back in there. Close that. Whole preview. And we'll go back down where we were. And then if we look at result 2, so we got no error, which is great. So we got that correct the first time, which is fabulous.
Awesome.
And it says here that it would have inserted keys and emails into keys and values. So we'll run that again, and then there's our code to display our API key. So if we come back in here and we get rid of that false and remove the debug and just trust this will run, and then we can go take a look at our database to see what got inserted. So we'll do sarahexample.com, get my API key, and there's my API key that was generated. So at this point, if we go and we look at our keys table, we should see one record. And we do, and we don't see a key because the field's called API key and not key.
I see.
So what we will do here is go and we will use the tools, I think it's tools, SQL data editor. We will pull open web service. We will select the keys table. I know it doesn't have a primary key. Oh, it won't let me do it. We'll use DB browse for SQLite. And this is we're going through this fun story of the day is, I went in the wrong folder here. Alpha Anywhere. Testing workspace. I lost my entire PowerPoint presentation. I didn't save it last night and deleted the whole thing. So
Gotta work in the cloud, Sarah.
Gotta work in the cloud.
It's beautiful.
Trying to remember where I put that database. It would be better if there it is. There's web service.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just delete this. How do we delete a row? Delete the current record. All right, great changes. All right, so we cleared that out, so we can test again to make sure we get it right this time. So let's go back here and make sure we make this API keys not here. So it was API key. So we want to look up API key. and the field we want to set is API key. And I'm going to close this database so it doesn't hold on to it for some reason. Sometimes that happens when using other tools to browse SQLite databases. It can lock them up and then Alpha Anywhere can't access them. So I'll do Sarah at example.com, get the API key. There's our API key. Come back here, open the database we were looking at earlier. Browse data, and there it is, Sarah, example.com. So there's a couple other things here that we'd probably want to set. We'd probably want to set expired to false, not necessarily null, to make an active decision that it is not expired. And then also insert the created date in here when we generate it. But that is sort of a basic, really basic, like I'm just using a GUID here that still has a bunch of symbols in it that I may not want to use an API key passed into HTTP request. But this is how you get started. So we will continue this demo next month. There will be no webinar next week. We're going to take that time off.
And then I think we return on January 5th is what I've got on the schedule.
Yes, I believe so. And if I can pull it up, it's still subject to change, but I wanted to share my email with everyone. Share the schedule that we've got tentatively planned for the next quarter of.
Ooh, look at that.
Yeah, I know.
I love it.
We're on top of things over
Excellent.
here. So I was just gonna pull that up real quick.
New year, new us, right?
New year, new us. And I just wanted to just share something with everybody that's here and everybody that's watching on YouTube. And that is what our goals are. So can you see my screen here?
Yep.
So this is the 2022 schedule. It's still in flux, but starting in January, we're going to go over some of the new features that are coming out in the new release, which might be shipped today. I am unsure, but I was told that we might actually put out a release today, December 22nd. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And then in it, it's got some cool new features in it. It's got the CSS grid container, which lets you do a flexible layout that looks like a table, but isn't using table tags. And then also this enter code control that is an interface you can use to capture a two-factor authentication code from somebody, and it has some cool little features in it that you can use to like shake the control if they entered it wrong and stuff like that. So we want to demo those starting next month, and then also we have we're going to do a presentation on the new Alpha Anywhere charting library. This is the JavaScript charting library. It says here that it's probably an intermediate presentation, but being an all JavaScript thing, I would consider it an advanced topic. So the documentation for that library literally got published yesterday. So it's very new. We're still working through it and making sure everything's in place and working out some of the problems in the system with linking. But we're really excited that we're moving forward on that because it's the charting that you saw in DevCon when you saw the transform dashboards. That's using the charting library. The list control uses this charting library. And this charting library is an option you can use in the JavaScript chart control. And that little piece that we've been missing for last couple of months now is just the documentation on how to use it. So we want to do a really good demo on that to explain how you can use that to start putting charts in your apps and your dashboards. So this is what's coming down the line, still subject to change. So look forward to that. And then also, if you are an attendee of this webinar and you've always thought to yourself, man, I would love it if I could share what I've built with other people, send an email to guys@alphasoftware.com, because something we want to do in 2022 is get more guest presenters on here. You guys loved the Robin Bennett presentation that happened a couple weeks ago. We love seeing what you're doing, so keep that in mind. And now I would like to open it up for questions.
Fantastic. Well, we don't have a ton of questions today on Alpha Anywhere, just sort of the standard one. When is that new release coming out? And as you said, allegedly today. So I'm going to say in the next few business days, you should see a new release of Alpha Anywhere, the new stable release. Also, we've been rebuilding our internal beta testing team here. So we hope that in the next releases that you get, they're going to come out more frequently without having to do patches quite as often once they are released, just to make everyone's life a lot easier. Let's see what else we're going to say. I think that's about it. So I had just sort of a question or observation. So what we built today here is the interface that like a programmer or a developer would go to get their API key. Is that kind of it?
Correct.
So,
Yeah, that's
and
where we're
then
starting.
in the future episode, you're going to show us how the
Yes,
software API itself is going to go look in that table and make sure that you're legit and you've got the right types of resources to do that.
correct. Yeah, and
Ooh,
that happens
this
in
looks like a
the.
preview for
This is
what's
a
coming.
preview of what's going to come down the road here.
All right.
Just getting it in place here, but that API that we generated includes a bunch of authentication methods in it called customer select authenticate, customer order details select authenticate, and order select authenticate. So this stuff is in there, but getting it turned on and configured is a little bit of work, and there's a lot of different places you need to go. And it doesn't matter if you start with a generated REST service that you created using our Genie, or if you're building this from scratch, all the places you got to go and check are the same. So that's what we're going to cover in the next
Excellent.
installment of this. So yeah,
All right.
I
So someone
wanted.
asked a really good question, and it's one I want to know the answer to as well. Where does JWT fit in these JavaScript
Oh,
web?
that's a great question actually, because
Yeah.
I just learned how and what that is. So
All right.
if we
It
go
was
back and we
probably
look,
in that PowerPoint that got erased last night, I bet. But,
no, it wasn't.
oh,
It's
okay,
going to
good.
be in the OAuth 2 presentation. So originally when I was going into this, I was like, oh, I got to show how to do OAuth 2, because why wouldn't we show OAuth 2 using Google to authenticate access to your API? Because that's like the best form of security you can go with. But it turns out that the process is very involved. But with respect to the JWT, with OAuth authentication, there are two kind of patterns where you can validate somebody who claims that they know, like the authenticate, prove that they are. So there's the first piece where the customer shares some secret that they've created with the authentication server to get a token that they send to you, that you then share with the authentication server and your secret. And that is a really strong way to prove that somebody is who they are. Now, there are
And
situations
that works
where
a
you
little
don't have a
differently than
secret.
API key, is that right?
Huh?
Does that work
Well,
differently with API or in conjunction with an API key?
it works differently.
Okay.
So with the JWT, it's a Java Web Token, JavaScript. Java Web Token. It contains a bunch of encrypted JSON data.
Mhm.
It's like who made the request, what they're asking for, what their token was. And in that second flow, it's a bit weaker. Instead of sharing a secret with the server to authenticate the user once you get the data, they give you a JWT token. And then all you do is ask the server, hey, is this correct? And it says yes. And so then every time you get that token, you just say, yes, you've been authorized. So I'm not going to check again. Though you could. And the nice thing about JWT is it eliminates the need for everybody to hold on to like these secrets and be registered with each other. So you kind of decentralize where that information is being tracked. And that first model is probably in a database somewhere. So there's a database lookup every time somebody asks to authenticate to make sure this person is who they are. The JWT contains that information. So what that lets you do is sort of authenticate quicker, but it also opens you up to risk, because if you do not, the scenario I was reading about was you get a JWT, it's good for 8 hours. So as long as this person keeps giving you this token, they're good for 8 hours. Suppose within that 8 hours, their access to your app has been revoked and they no
Right.
longer have authorization. If you don't go back to the authorization server and say, hey, I have this JWT token, is it still valid? To check,
Oh,
you
then
don't
the
know
app
that
isn't going to
happened.
know. I see what you mean.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
the
yeah.
token says you're still valid, but the server might say you're not. And so there's a decision you have to make there, and I do want to talk about this. So like maybe you're okay that they're not authorized anymore for the remainder of the 8 hours. Maybe the only thing they're looking at is cat pictures. So you don't need to worry about it, right? Once the token expires, they're expired. But if they're accessing something like order data, maybe you want to throw them out of your system immediately. So it's a compromise between speed, because every time you have to double check that token for like that they're authorized, you're doing more processing. So that can slow you down, especially if you're talking about millions of queries on your API every hour. So it's a bit of a compromise. But that's kind of what JWT is. I hope that explains it. I do want to get into it more.
It
I
sounds
do
like
think
we
it's
should
really
do a
cool
whole session on
technology.
it.
Yeah.
Too
Yeah.
much
Well,
in the remaining couple minutes that we have here, but we do have a question that you could answer in that time, which is, were we affected? We've got this question a lot. Were we affected by the Log4j flaw, the security flaw that seemed to be wreaking havoc on
no,
most
we're
software
not. None of
companies?
Alpha's servers are affected by that. Now, Alpha Cloud does use Amazon Web Services that were affected by Log4j, but they were patched immediately, so those vulnerabilities no longer exist.
Excellent.
Yeah, and if you guys would like our official statement, we can. If you send us an email, we'll send that to you. It's also on the forums. I think Lenny posted it up on our forum.
Very cool. So yeah, so a discussion. It looks like there's a lot of support here for a JWT discussion for a future
Yes,
time.
it's
Cool,
pretty
awesome.
fascinating.
Yeah. Let me see. That looks like it. Let me just take a quick peek and see if there are any questions that we can get to right at the moment. Yeah, it looks like we've gone through them. Hey, Sarah, thanks very much. This was really helpful. I'm looking forward to the next couple of API sessions as well. It's such a powerful technology and technique that it's really important that we all get good at it and familiar with it. So appreciate it very
Yes,
much.
and I do want to make sure people understand how this works.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So anyway, to all of you who showed up today, first of all, I'm sorry for the haphazard way you got invited. I think it just showed up in a HubSpot email today. We are changing that starting in January. We're going to get proper reminders out. So we hope to see you then. Until then, we'll see you on January 5th. Hope you have a wonderful Christmas, wonderful New Year's. Take care and stay well. Bye-bye.